Good to see some of the same faces as last week, as well as a lot of new faces. How many of you are doing the Fund for American Studies program this summer? Yeah, pretty good number. Well, welcome to all of you, whether you're in the Fund for American Studies program, an intern on the Hill, or an intern elsewhere in Washington, D.C. I'm Roger Ream. I'm president of TFAS, as we call it, and I'm here to welcome you to our second lecture of our Capitol Hill Lecture Series. This is the 11th year we've done this program, and we've always had just really great speakers over the years, and I think that's no exception this summer. Following the program today, you'll get a free lunch. There is such a thing as a free lunch, or at least one that's funded by Steve and Nancy Einhorn, supporters of ours who live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And our staff will be here to give you coupons you can take to the cafeteria to eat. This summer, we've kind of themed our lectures as courageous leaders who challenge the status quo, and we're bringing in people who have done that or are doing that. Each of our speakers has been in the thick of the national conversation on very important issues, including the lockdowns over COVID, social media, censorship, and other important issues. There are people who are willing to stand up to power and challenge the status quo and take the slings and arrows that come from doing that. Last week, we had Matt Taibbi here, a trailblazer in journalism who got access to the Twitter files and spoke about the importance of free press and free speech. Many of you were here for that. Today we have also a very interesting speaker who will be talking about censorship, and we've got others coming in July who you'll want to hear. Our next program will not be until July 12th because of the 4th of July recess schedule on the Hill. So July 12th, we're going to be in a different room, but you'll be able to register for that program soon, and you'll be getting emails, or you can talk to our staff on your way out to get the details. And then we'll have several more after that in July that you'll want to attend. Well, now it's my pleasure to introduce our partner in this educational endeavor, Senator Rand Paul. Since being elected to the Senate from the great state of Kentucky in 2010, Senator Paul has been a courageous and tireless fighter for a return to limited constitutional government. Every day he's on the front lines fighting for liberty, transparency in government, adherence to the Constitution, and other very important values of our country. So please welcome Senator Rand Paul.
All right, thanks for coming out today. We're excited to have John Tamny with us. He's the Vice President of FreedomWorks, Senior Fellow in Economics at the Reason Foundation. He's the Political Economy Editor at Forbes and the editor of Real Clear Markets. He came back to my attention recently because he wrote an article about TikTok, about banning TikTok, and I loved the title, and I repeated it and used it on the floor in the Senate because the title was, "We're going to combat Chinese authoritarianism by becoming Chinese authoritarians." So that, I hope, will be some of the theme of his talk today. John is the author of Popular Economics, What the Rolling Stones, Downton Abbey, and LeBron James Can Teach You About Economics. Guess he must have a sense of humor. Another book, Who Needs the Fed? What Taylor Swift, Uber, and Robots Tell Us About Money, Credit, and Why We Should Abolish America's Central Bank. John graduated from the University of Texas and obtained an MBA from Vanderbilt. He lives in Bethesda, Maryland, with his wife Kendall and kids Claire and Reed. Please give a warm welcome to John Tamny.
Thank you very much. Can't stress enough what a treat it is to be here today. To think that TFAS invited me, that Roger Ream, we go back years, and what TFAS has done to change the terms of the policy debate is profound. So what a nice invite. And then to have Senator Paul ask me to come talk is just, it's that Brady Bunch scene where I'll never wash this hand again or something. Some people say so-and-so is their president or is not their president. Well, Senator Paul is my president, so what a treat to be invited out by him and his office to speak today. So thank you very much, but most of all, it's important for me to be here and exciting for me to be here because I can say without a hint of hyperbole that I'm talking to the richest generation in the history of the richest nation in the history of the world. It cannot be stressed enough how much your generation's going to accomplish. And the reason you're going to accomplish so much in ways that make the present look very impoverished by comparison has to do with the very things that people are saying you should be fearful of. They say be fearful of artificial intelligence, be fearful of robots, they're going to take your jobs. No, what they're going to do is they're going to make all of you geniuses at work. Anytime a machine can reduce labor, anytime machines can add hands to the workforce, that means the human hands in the workforce get to more and more specialize. And in specializing, they get to showcase their unique genius and intelligence on the job. I've always rejected the notion that there are dumb people or lazy people. But what I accept is that slow economies suffocate all sorts of genius. And in a free economy like ours, in which robots and automation will more and more reveal their genius, it means that the people in this room will get to do jobs that the world never imagined humans would get to do. And in specializing, you'll get to achieve on a level that will once again make the present seem kind of poor by comparison. And so I say this to you as a call for optimism first and foremost. Don't let these pessimists out there tell you that the future is bleak. It's not. It couldn't be anything less than bleak. But I also say this as a way of saying, stop insulting your country with pessimism. I hear it all the time from both sides. If Donald Trump is elected president, we're going to be Venezuela. He will destroy our country. I hear if Hillary Clinton is elected or Joe Biden is destroying this country. What an insulting thing to say. To say that one individual could destroy the greatest country ever created. What you're saying is not just that the U.S. is weak and that one person could wreck it, but you're also insulting your party, whether Democrat, Republican, or your ideology, because you're saying that your side just will lie there and allow someone to do the wrecking. Well, that's not how we do things. So at least around me, don't insult the U.S. by talking about how Joe Biden's destroying us or someone could destroy. What an insult to the United States. Be optimistic about what's ahead, because there's so much to be optimistic about. 99.9% of the world would give anything to be seated where you are. And never forget that. Be thankful every day for what you have. And don't buy into the pessimism that's so popular on both sides. All of which brings me to TikTok and China and free speech. That's the topic of my discussion today. And to begin it, I think it's important to travel back in time to the former Soviet Union. I know all of you have at least heard of it. Most of you probably don't remember it. But if you go back in time to, say, the 1970s in Moscow, it's fascinating to look back about how bleak and miserable life was. The late writer Jeffrey Boca was living in Moscow in the 1970s, and in his book, The Moscow Scene, wrote about walking into a restaurant and seeing a menu that quite literally it was gossamer thin and just beaten up. It hadn't been changed in decades, only for him to ask for chicken Kiev that was on the menu. And this gruff waiter told him, well, there will be no chicken Kiev for you. You can have caviar. Well, no, actually, I'd like chicken Kiev. No, you will have caviar. That's your only option. Only for incredibly inedible caviar to be brought before him on horrific-looking plates with utensils that none of us would want to touch. This is the physical truth about communism. Communism is defined by unrelenting misery, and it is because life under communism is bereft of private property. It's bereft of success. You don't get to keep what you produce, and so there's nothing worthwhile produced. The late, great P.J. O'Rourke used to say that what really ended the Cold War with communist countries was Bulgarian blue jeans. They were so physically awful to look at. And that's what communism was. It was shoes that you did not want, clothes that you would never wear. Russians earned rubles, but the rubles were worthless because they were only exchangeable for the hideous things produced inside a communist country, which means they didn't buy much of anything with rubles. And this is important to consider in light of the modern discussion about China. And the simple truth is, I'm not going to try to convince you here today that you should love China, but let's at least end the nonsensical notion that China is a communist country in practice or in how the people live. And we end this first and foremost because the people aren't starving, because the people are living. We end that discussion right here just by saying if you've ever been to Shanghai, or if you've seen pictures, or if you ever visit Shanghai, everywhere you look, you'll see a McDonald's, a Kentucky Fried Chicken, a Dairy Queen, an Apple store, a Nike store, a Microsoft store. The Chinese people are conducting a passionate love affair right now with everything American. And I tell you this because if the country was communist, none of these businesses would be meeting the needs of the Chinese people, and they wouldn't, simply because the Chinese people would not have the means to patronize these businesses. Most would probably agree that McDonald's is the foremost symbol of American capitalism the world over. Well, guess what? The second largest market in the world for McDonald's is China. Eventually, China will be McDonald's largest market, even larger than the United States. Nike, most would agree, is a symbol, a global symbol of capitalism. Its largest non-US market is China. What is the most valuable company in the world today? It's Apple. Apple's based in Cupertino, but it sells 1/5 of its iPhones in China. There are 4,100 Starbucks in China, on the way to 7,000, on the way to 10,000, and more and more. The largest box office in the world for Hollywood, other than, again, the United States, is once again China. And I say this, again, if it were a communist country, none of this would be true. But secondly, I think we have to trust the businesses that exist in the United States, the greatest businesses the world has ever known. The fact that they are so aggressively trying to court this market is a signal that China is many things, none of them realistically communist. Is China as free of a country as the United States? Certainly not, but I don't know of any country that realistically is. But let's just agree first and foremost that while Moscow was defined by businesses that weren't even businesses and that were horrifying to go into, for any of you to visit China today, you'd feel probably more at home than just about any Chinese person in the country, because everywhere you look is an American business meeting the needs of the Chinese people who can't get enough of everything American. And so, and you think about this in a bigger sense, think about it in terms of TikTok. So TikTok is a Beijing-based company. And the view now is that, well, we don't know what the Chinese government, what the Chinese Communist Party is doing vis-a-vis TikTok, so we must ban it. We must take away its right to exist in the United States. We must essentially burn this book because too many Americans are using TikTok. Well, as Senator Paul alluded just now, that sounds awfully Chinese. How odd that our response to, we don't want Chinese values to infiltrate the United States, so let's ban TikTok, only for us to act in the worst way possible, in the ways that some of the worst Chinese Communist Party leadership would potentially act toward us. It's an interesting notion on its face. At which point people say, well, you know, but TikTok, because it's China-based, is potentially going to infiltrate the United States with all sorts of pro-communist propaganda. Isn't that dangerous? Well, my response to that is, even if you could prove to me that it were true, that in fact they were just promoting communism, I would still be horrified at the thought of banning TikTok in the United States. Aren't we for free speech? I mean, it wasn't the United States founded on skepticism about politicians, on free speech about limiting the ability of politicians to take away our freedom? Well, if you're for free speech, how could you be for banning a company, banning an entity that helps inform speech? We don't go after the Socialist Party of the United States. There's all sorts of communist, socialist groups in the United States. We don't ban them. The whole point is that people should be allowed to be exposed to anything and make decisions based on that and choose what they believe. If you're for free speech, you must be for the sources of that speech, not against them. But we're talking about how we need to ban TikTok right now because they might infiltrate the United States with communistic ideas. Which brings us to another truth about TikTok. At present, TikTok is used more minutes per day, at least quadruple the minutes per day that Americans spend on Facebook, on Instagram, and all sorts of these other social media. If you ever needed evidence that TikTok is not an arm of the Chinese Communist Party, the fact that it's so heavily used is your surest evidence. Because what defines capitalism? What defines success in a capitalist society? It's not so much giving people what they want. What capitalists do, what entrepreneurs do, is they lead us in all new directions. Steve Jobs of Apple could have easily created a really cool BlackBerry, but he said, no, I'm going to lead people in an all new direction. Entrepreneurs constantly do that. They constantly take us to where we didn't know we wanted to be. And that's why entrepreneurs succeed in the face of relentless pessimism about their ability to succeed. Has TikTok succeeded? I would submit to you that 150 million American users is a sign of remarkable success, and it's the sign of a company discovering and leading Americans to a place they never thought they needed to go. That's not what communists do. Again, go back to that restaurant in Moscow in the 1970s. In communist-run restaurants, you will take and you will eat and you will get the service that they choose to provide you, assuming they want to provide you anything, which has nothing to do with TikTok. TikTok basically learns from your viewing history what you're most interested in seeing. In fact, it keeps giving you more and more and more of what you want and leads you in more and more new directions about what you want based on what you've already witnessed, what you've shown a preference for. Communists, this is the exact opposite of communism. Again, the surest sign that TikTok is not an arm of the Chinese Communist Party is its immense popularity in the United States. If you ever wondered about just the overdone, the hysteria about TikTok, just look at how popular it is. When has government ever touched something and made it better? I mean, at some point we have to look at TikTok in terms of what we already believe. Many in this room are working in Washington today because they are for limited government. And you're for limited government because you're for freedom first and foremost, but also because you've witnessed throughout your lives that when government touches something or when government gets involved, it weakens what it attempted to improve. What did Ronald Reagan long ago say? The 9 scariest words in the English language are, I'm from the federal government and I'm here to help. And so we know what government does to businesses. Yet at the same time, we want to say, well, in the case of TikTok, yeah, it's controlled by the Communist Party. And oh, by the way, it also has 150 million users. Sorry, those viewpoints are wholly contradictory of one another. You can't have one or the other. If the Chinese government is involved with TikTok, the answer is simple. Don't worry about it. Why would you ban what is going to be destroyed by government in the first place? But if it's not controlled by government, as I think logic dictates, its popularity tells you that it's not controlled by government. If it's not, why would you want to ban what Americans like? Aren't we about freedom first and foremost? And is it somehow different when it's from another country? Were the Chinese hurt by the fact that, again, Apple sells 1/5 of its iPhones in China? Certainly not. That has elevated. Every day that the Americans are productive in the United States is a better day for the Chinese. Well, it's no different for the Chinese. When they produce for us, when they meet our needs, when they lead our needs, that frees more and more of us up to do the work that most elevates us. In short, we would be a much poorer country without China, without the TikToks of the world trying to improve our lives, trying to meet our needs. And so keep this in mind as people continue to make this argument that, well, they're doing the bidding. The Chinese Communist Party is doing the bidding. It's trying to infiltrate your minds with communist notions, and they're trying to destroy the country within. Well, again, show me a government agency that's ever been successful at doing that, at which point I submit to you the Chinese people once again. The Chinese people to visit the country, to witness them, and to see that they are having a passionate love affair with all sorts of American products. So if you're telling us that the Chinese Communist Party can't even convince its own people about how bad the United States is, but we're supposed to believe that they can convince us? I mean, lots of luck with that. Seriously, lots of luck with that. And so in thinking about this in a very broad sense, I ask you to be open-minded about it. Do you really want to be the party or the ideology that wants to ban things? Do you want to be the ideology that basically burns books? I think not. What we want is we want to be open to the genius of others. Because when we're open to the genius of others, we're not just promoting freedom, but we're also promoting peace. I hear a lot on Fox about how big businesses want to keep relations going together with China. They want to keep these trading lanes open. And they say it in a pejorative way. I'm thinking, wait, it's bad? My reaction is, well, thank goodness big business wants this. Because see, if we're trading with each other, war with each other becomes very expensive. What did John F. Kennedy's father say, Joseph P. say to John F. Kennedy? He always drummed into his head that war is bad for business. Amen to that. What is wrong with that? I love when business wants to be engaged with other parts of the world because it makes the shootings kind of war incredibly expensive. And so I ask you to keep this in mind as the talk continues about how we need to ban TikTok. We need to get rid of free speech. It's not just that we're violating what the United States was founded on, about freedom to to speak as you wish and to get and to use the information that you get as you wish. But we're also doing it in such a way that if suddenly we're not the market for China that we should be, and if suddenly China's not the market for the American people that it should be, war becomes less and less expensive, which is the last thing that we would ever want to see happen. And so in closing, do we really want to be what we claim we don't want to be? The Chinese government in its present form is authoritarian. Is it as authoritarian as people think in the United States? Probably not. To visit Shanghai is to see that it's not as awful as we're told. In 1978, there were 12 tall buildings in Shanghai. By 2006, there were 6,780. Today, that number is dated. To go to Shanghai, everywhere you look is a tall building going way high into the sky. People, the state didn't build this. These are people who want to eat and feed their families in the way the Americans do. And so we have a choice. We can either make them enemies and shut off the flow of the very trade that is the greatest foreign policy concept ever created, or we can remain open to it, wholly confident that if government is behind anything, including a business, it's not going to be a business that Americans are going to want to patronize in the first place. Communism is about failure. And so if the Communist Party takes over Chinese businesses, don't worry about it. But if it doesn't, let's engage, let's trade, let's work with these people. Thank you very much.
Raise your hand if you want to ask something. We have mics.
You're all convinced.
Hi, Hi, my name is Jacqueline Burr. I'm a student with TFAS and I work for the Well News as an intern. I'm a journalist. And my question, you said before that the main citizens' concerns about TikTok was that it was promoting communism, like infiltrating those kinds of things. What do you think about the data privacy side of that and the data rights?
It's a very good question. What do I think about the data privacy aspect of it? Well, for one, even if TikTok didn't exist, if the Chinese government wanted to get data on the American people, it could easily buy it because the data's for sale. All these, quote, free websites we go to are free because they are learning more about us. Now, I think that's a good thing. We're going to these websites where we're using Facebook voluntarily, and Facebook, in learning about us, is looking for ways to meet and lead our needs better. The opposite of that is, again, that restaurant in Moscow in communist area, Soviet Union, where they didn't want to learn anything about you. They didn't care about your needs. And so anytime a business wants to learn more about me, I think that's a good thing. And so data privacy, again, if the Chinese want to get it, they can get it just by buying it, at which point, really, who cares? And in saying this, let me take you once again back to the 1970s. There's never been a better funded intelligence service than our own CIA. It had endless amounts of money to spy on the Soviets and all sorts of our enemies way back when, and still does. Do you realize what these clowns discovered? They discovered in the 1970s that the CIA was claiming that the Soviet economy was realistically half or maybe closer to 3/4 as large as the United States. Nothing could be further from the truth. The Soviets had no economy, as anyone who visited there could see, who looked at it. There was no economy because when people aren't free to produce and have private property, there's no economy. Yet our CIA, with all this funding, thought that there was growth going on in the Soviet Union. This same CIA had no clue of the Soviet Union's looming decline. It was completely surprised. So the late Senator Patrick Moynihan, a Democrat, made the point, he said, why don't we just shut these clowns down after the Soviet Union fell, because the CIA serves no purpose. They didn't even know what anyone who visited the Soviet Union clearly see. This country was dying. And so we're suddenly fearful of Chinese intelligence, that maybe they might go to TikTok and say, we want to learn more about what people are watching on TikTok. What could they get from it? And assuming they could get information, what would they do with it? Talented people generally don't work in intelligence, whether it's the United States, China, or anywhere. If they're talented, they're working in the private sector, and I don't think anything's different, so I don't worry about it.
Hi, thank you so much for taking time to talk to us today. My name is Sachi and I'm an intern, and kind of following up on her question, I was wondering how you respond to concerns about political interference or influence on TikTok as drawn by incidences in the 2016 election.
Okay, so political interference, whether it could be TikTok, I know that Facebook, this came up with Facebook. There was a book by a British journalist way back when named Robert Crankshaw, and he was talking about his dealings with Soviet era people in the government. And I can't do justice to his comment, but he said, basically he's saying, I've never been around people less competent than the leaders in the Russian government. I mean, he said their lack of understanding about how to get by in the real world was astounding. And so we were supposed to believe back in 2016 that they spent $100,000 on Facebook and swayed an election. I mean, have you ever heard something more ridiculous in your life? The Russians? I mean, were they joking? It's amazing. It insults dumb to think about what they said. And you don't even want to call it wrong. Wrong would suggest that there's some logic behind this. But look at it more broadly. People spend billions on political campaigns in the United States, and they frequently get it wrong. Michael Bloomberg spent, what, $500 million and got how many Democratic primary votes or electoral, whatever it was? Yet we're supposed to believe that the Russians can sway elections, or that the CCP can sway elections. There's billions to be made if you can do that. And some of the greatest minds in American politics, we find out time after time, don't know how to do it. So the idea that somehow the Russians or the Chinese have some grasp of the American voter, of the American electorate, is just, to me, it's laughable.
Hi, my name is Rob Cuff. I'm working for Congressman Van Drew. And I just kind of want to ask you, how do you address the concerns that when businesses start to be working a lot more with China, which is, as you said, isn't a communist country, but is an authoritarian dictatorship that is now affecting like our free speech to talk about the CCP, Hong Kong, and Taiwan?
I still think whenever there's a chance for trade, it's better than the alternative. All sorts of businesses go out of their way to not offend all sorts of viewpoints. Do I wish China were freer? Of course I do. But there's one thing I'd say about this. In the U.S., again, we're an incredibly rich country, that China's still a very poor country relative to us, incredibly poor. When we talk about these dissidents and the authoritarian nature of the Chinese government toward them, and I'm not trying to minimize that at all. The fact that Jimmy Lai is in prison is ridiculous and horrifying. But never forget that Jimmy Lai is probably a name that the vast majority of Chinese people have never heard. And that's not because they don't have access to the information. It's a known quantity that, for instance, if you're remotely skillful with computers in China, you can get all the information you want on the internet about Tiananmen Square and all the bad things government's doing. But the typical Chinese is so focused on work right now and basically trying to eat and prosper after decades of being desperately poor. They just don't know about this stuff. Jimmy Lai is well known in Washington, D.C., and New York City, and Paris, and London. And so again, it's not to defend the Chinese government. Wouldn't it be great if they were all more like us? But the typical Chinese person doesn't know about the things that you know about. They're just doing their jobs. It's often been said about Americans that Americans aren't very well read. No, we're not. We descend from people who came from around the world in pursuit of freedom. And so Americans aren't as focused on a lot of the political stuff, on a lot of the knowledge stuff that the rest of the world is. We're different, and I would say, I think the Chinese people generally, they don't know about a lot of this stuff. Their day-to-day existence doesn't involve the government nearly as much as we think. And how we know that is to, once again, to travel around the country and visit its cities. The people are working feverishly. The ability to work isn't being constrained as much, and so they don't have as much dealings with government.
Hi, my name's Philip. I'm working for Mike Boss as an intern. And I guess my question would be that while it is good to have open trade and to preserve kind of the world order that we have now, with what our morals are in this country, do we not still owe it to ourselves and what we stand for to stand up against a country like China that can compete with us because of the way their structure is? Like, I know that on the majority of their companies' boards, they have CCP members, and the way that they incentivize competition with Western companies is that they provide advantages and they prefer those that are good at their jobs, and it's not exactly like the Soviets in that sense. But shouldn't we take a moral stance and be hesitant and very wary and resistant towards making them any more wealthy than they are now, with all the problems that they have and how tremendously hurtful they are to our interests abroad?
It's a good question. How many, if you went to Citibank up in New York right now and walked its headquarters, there's at least 60, but realistically more than that, regulators headquartered, federal, state, headquartered inside Citibank right now. Anytime any U.S. company ever succeeds, invariably government politicians call them to Washington to, quote, explain their success. Bill Gates' biggest problem in creating Microsoft, for the longest time the most valuable company in the world, is he didn't have a man in Washington. And his reward for not having a man in Washington is the Department of Justice under Bill Clinton tried to take his company from him and tried to break it up. Jeff Bezos of Amazon, I think, learned the lesson of Bill Gates. Do you think he wanted to own the Washington Post? I really doubt it. What does it have to do with his business? It has everything to do with his business in the sense, though, that in owning the Washington Post, he bought protection from politicians. Notice how quickly when Amazon agreed to purchase Whole Foods, how quickly the merger went through, within about 2 months. When Whole Foods had merged with Wild Oats years before, they held it up for over a year. And so I'm not defending the CCP being on company boards, but I see lots of ex-politicians in the United States being on boards of companies here. They have all sorts of influence. And so I don't think it's as different as you think. Now, beyond that, so the question is, because China is immoral, shouldn't we not trade with them? And my response is, why is it every time politicians decide that another country is bad, that the American people have to be the losers in it? Why is it that government power always has to grow when politicians make these decisions about other countries? Because the Chinese, every day they get up, you can say that their leadership is immoral, we can talk for hours about that, but every day that the Chinese people get up and go to work, the American people get a raise. The cost of living goes lower and lower because the Chinese people produce more and more of us more cheaply and cheaply. And that's just one side of it. Because we get so much from China, because their people are joining the global workforce, Americans more and more get to specialize in the kind of work that most elevates their unique skills and intelligence. So it raises the question, why should Americans see their standards of living decline so that politicians can make their point about what they deem moral and what isn't? I'm for freedom first and foremost. I'm for the freedom of individuals to choose with whom they will exchange. That is not the job of politicians to tell me whom I can exchange with. And if I find it immoral, I don't have to exchange with them. But don't take away the right of others to do that. And again, it goes back to, why is government always the victor in these things? And why, for those who believe in freedom, why would you support a scenario like that?
Hello, my name is Olivia Momberg. I'm a student with TFAS and I intern at the National Disability Rights Network. I'm just wondering, you've talked a lot about working, and I so much agree with a lot of the points you've made, and I haven't actually learned a lot about the subject, so it's enlightening to hear about it. But I do wonder your moral stance on you talk about working, but what about the child labor and the labor laws and things like that that are morally being broken in China? How do you think that plays into how what you're talking about working, or once again, are we just free to choose?
Very good question. Child labor laws, and they're different in other countries. Well, it used to be that American children worked from the earliest of days, only for investment to flow so profoundly into the United States that children didn't have to. As in the value of a job in a factory, say 100 years ago, the equipment was too valuable to use on young kids because the parents or older people could be exponentially more productive with it. And in being much more productive with it, we didn't need kids in factories. They could be kids. That's not as true in other parts of the world. Never forget that the minute some person sets foot in the United States, they become exponentially more productive by virtue of being in the United States. And as a consequence, more and more Americans don't have to work, whether young or old, because those working are so incredibly productive that the basic needs of living and much more than that are already taken care of. For the Chinese people, they're not so lucky in all instances. They are desperately poor in many instances, in which case work is a necessity. But that's another argument for the morality of us being open to working with others, to trading with others. Because as the world becomes more interconnected, as more and more Chinese people enter into the global workforce and work productively in that way, the result will be the kids of the future in China will not have to work at a young age. More and more of them will get to do as Americans do, whereby pretty much young kids in the United States today don't have to work until they want to. What a luxury. I mean, think about it. Roger knows this from past speeches, but there are no ski bums in Bangladesh. There are lots of ski bums in the United States. Many of you in college know them already. And they have living standards that would be the dream of the rest of the world. But you have to have the growth first, and that's another reason to stay engaged with the rest of the world.
Hi, I'm Bennett Cullison with Senator Grassley's office. I was just wondering, how do we deal with intellectual property disputes in the free market?
Very good question. Intellectual property disputes. I think this is one of the bigger lies of modern times. Well, they're stealing our intellectual property. Jeff Bezos is arguably the richest man in the world today. Just about everything he's ever tried, including the creation of Amazon, was widely ridiculed. Look back at videos of him on Jay Leno back in the early days of Amazon. They would shame him on TV, but wait, you don't make any profits. People thought Amazon was a crazy idea. Bill Gates of Microsoft has pointed out that just about every notion that he's ever tried was ridiculed. And so when people talk about the theft of intellectual property, please tell me what you would steal or what the Chinese would steal. Because if any of you know what's good intellectual property, come to me after this and let's go up to New York tomorrow. We will have billions of dollars in our employ, under our management, between breakfast and lunch. Intellectual property, what is it and what would you take? Again, the vast majority of entrepreneurial or business ideas fail. And so the idea that the Chinese, for being Chinese, somehow know what to steal from the United States, that on its own is a reach of mythical proportions, Herculean proportions, realistically. At which point, what would you do with the information once you stole it? Again, just about everything that Jeff Bezos has ever tried was ridiculed. Just about, Elon Musk, read his story. Just about everything he's ever done was laughed off. He nearly went bankrupt so many times because people thought his ideas were nuts. And so again, what would you take? And so this idea that the Chinese are stealing from us, well, for one, everyone steals from everyone else. What is the NFL but a copycat league? Why is it that Ford Motor Company and GM and Chrysler for years have kind of hidden the looks of their cars ahead of them being released? Because everyone's always spying on everyone else. But even then, it's impossible to know what's going to succeed in the future. If we knew, or if anyone here knows, again, we'd all be billionaires. So I think we vastly overstate the importance of it one way or the other.
Hello, Devin, thank you first for speaking. My name is Devin. I'm an intern with the Office of Congresswoman De La Cruz. Sort of continuing with the IP idea, what are your thoughts on tariffs when it comes to China, especially when it comes to our former President Trump's tariffs? I think it was between 200 and 300 billion of goods coming into the country that were tariffed under the assumption that there was some sort of IP theft from American companies and goods.
Okay, what is commonly stated as the beauty of free trade or open markets is that, I mean, it's a pretty beautiful thing. It means you have the whole world competing to meet your needs. And in competing for your business, you have the whole world fighting to give you a discount or fighting to give you the best price. It's pretty, I would say, reasonable endorsement of free trade, but I would argue that it grossly understates the brilliance of being open to the world's production. The greatest thing about free trade is that it makes it most likely for those who are in a place where markets are open to do the work that most elevates their unique genius and intelligence. If you have the whole world working for you, working to meet your needs and lead your needs, you have better odds of doing the work that is most unique about you, that most elevates you. I would argue that one of the biggest reasons the U.S. is rich is, first of all, we descend from the crazies around the world who wanted to come here, didn't ask for security, they just wanted freedom to live up to their potential. Big deal. When you talk to Americans, you say, where are your ancestors from? They could be from anywhere. What a beautiful story that is. After which, 50 states where there are no regulations about the movement of people and goods. Talk about a source of prosperity. Capital, goods, and people go to where their work is most valued, or go to their highest use. Imagine what happens what you do for a country when you expand, make your country open to the world, which is basically what the U.S. is. We are basically Hong Kong. The average tariff on foreign goods in the U.S., it should be 0, but is roughly 1.5%. And so Americans are rich because they have the whole world producing for them, and because they do, they get to do the work that they do best. And when you're doing what you do best, it's not work anymore. You're exponentially more productive, and you're exponentially richer. And so tariffs are horrifying on so many levels. And again, they empower government at the expense of people. And so I'm against them in all ways. In a perfect world, we'd be at 0. But we're pretty close, which is something. We are Hong Kong, but a massive country of Hong Kong.
John, I was going to use my prerogative to ask the last question.
Okay. Make it nice.
You opened your remarks today by telling everyone here that they're lucky to be in the richest generation ever. No one asked you to try to justify that, so I will. Given just the growth of the administrative state, the impact of the pandemic lockdown, the acceleration of governments soaking up money and spending with runway spending, I think there's a lot of pessimism in our country today about the future, and whether the next generation will have it better than the generation before them. Could you maybe make that case a little more?
There's a businessman named Elbert Hubbard who says, don't even try socialism or communism on America's youth. They're so lazy that they wouldn't work for if they won't work for themselves, how can we expect them to work for others? Well, guess when that was said? Elbert Hubbard said it in 1899 about the grandparents of the greatest generation. This notion that America's youth, these kids today, are lazy and entitled and spoiled and just expect everything handed to them is as old as the United States is, and really realistically older. And it's the most bullish thing you could ever say about the United States. Of course young people are entitled and spoiled because we keep progressing. And when we keep progressing, more and more of what used to be unexpected or not expected becomes a fact of life. But does that keep kids down? No. You kids grew up with technology that you're going to thoroughly transform. What to me, I was so late to all this, is just second nature to you. And so you're going to transform it for the better and the better and the better. Now Roger Ream, of course, talks about government spending, which is a tax on progress. It's an awful thing. There's the lockdowns, which were unspeakably wrong. I wrote a book that all of you should buy called When Politicians Panicked, which was a takedown of these horrific lockdowns that made absolutely no sense. There's always things that are going wrong. We are always, in a sense, living in the dark ages. But what's true about the United States is that no matter what, capitalism always works its way around this. And so every generation, they say, is going to underperform the previous generation. It's never true. And it's never true because every generation grows up with technology such that it becomes second nature to them, and they improve on it and improve on it. And now we're hearing about how robots and machines will think for us. Whoa! Go back in time to Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. His book didn't invent capitalism. Adam Smith was writing about capitalism. In the opening of his book, he's at a factory, a pin factory. And so he's talking about how one man in this pin factory working alone could maybe produce 1 pin per day. But several men working together could produce tens of thousands. And so what does that tell you? When work is divided, our ability to specialize on the way to exponentially greater productivity grows and grows. And so this is the 1700s. You guys are going to divide up work with machines that don't just do for you, but think for you. And think for you 365 days a year, 24/7. What that means in terms of all of your ability to specialize is impossible for me to discuss realistically. But what it signals is your potential for achievement is such that we can't describe it here. I believe in your lifetimes cancer in myriad forms will be cured. Private jets will just be a commonplace. I mean, trust me. Within your adulthood, private flight will just be the norm, and it's probably not too far away. So yes, there's always dark ages. There's always politicians looking to basically put an oar in the gears and everything. But we're on the verge of not just combining effort, division of labor, again, the pin factory. We're about to turn the pin factory into a thought factory where machines think for us. Which, wow, watch out what you guys are. I am so jealous of all of you. And I'm even more jealous of your kids. What I'd give to be being born today. What is going to happen, the jobs you'll do, what you'll do for a living is going to stagger you for how much it reflects your unique genius. And so don't buy into the pessimism. We're always in the dark ages, but innovators always figure out a way around the dark ages.